Okay, so let's look at m3t1 first. So this is a question that is pretty similar to something we would have done in Module 2. So the idea here is I'm going to need to use cn to ask the user to enter in the length and width of two rectangles. And then I've got to look up, okay, well, how do I find the area of a rectangle? That one's pretty easy. It's just multiplication. And display them both. And the reason we do that is so that we can set up everything other than the if statement, because m3t2 has us now say, well, which one is bigger, or are they the same area? So that's pretty straightforward. Let's go into REPL it, and let's look at that. So I'll, from now on in these, just sort of assume that you know how to make a header for your file, which everybody has done. I haven't had any problems with that. So I'll kind of speed past that part. Okay, and we'll do using namespace standard. Again, the problem we want to solve here is to ask the user to enter two rectangles width and height, and then to calculate the area. So that one's pretty straightforward. Okay. Let's make this an eagle line. Okay. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, as I often do when I start writing out comments, because I just think of the first thing that comes to mind. So declare variables. So as usual, declare the variables, ask for some input, calculate the answer, and display results. So this is sort of really similar to what we did in the last one, which in the last homework in particular, the one that was due this week for chapter 2, involves a lot of, okay, ask the user to enter some information, do something with it, and then print the answer, which is the standard process we'll use when we're writing code. So fair enough. I'll say int length, let's say width. Okay. I'm just going to do the first rectangle, and then we'll do the second one after that. Okay. And that's something that maybe you don't often see, and maybe if I were planning this out differently, I might say, well, I want to have one statement to say, please enter the width of the first rectangle, and then please enter the width of the second rectangle, and have cn statements in between them. But I'm trying this out because, as we saw last time, one of the little quirks of cn, as opposed to like input in Python or readline in Java, is that it's going to take everything with a white space as a new item. So this will, if I type in two numbers separated by space, or I press enter between them, it's going to read them both in. Okay, so I'll say here area 1 equals width times length. All right. So again, when one of the biggest things that'll get you when you're writing code is not knowing what to do next. And so I always try to break the problem down to the very smallest piece. So we have this problem where we want to find the area of two rectangles. Okay, well, I'm going to have to do one of them in order to do two, and there's no point in me writing all the code and then finding out I made the same mistake twice. So I'm going to write the program as if there was only, let's do 4 by 5, or 4 by 5. That's good. As if there were only one rectangle, and then I will add in the code for the second rectangle. Actually, I'll just add these on the same line. And again, there's no particular reason that I am doing them all on one line, except that it saves me a little bit of time. But because these are all sort of the same thing, I think it makes sense to do that. All right, and I will copy and paste and do the next one. Some people have asked before, well, when do you use new line? When do you use endl? It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. I like to use endl. I just think it's a little easier to read. I know what end of line means. Okay. Okay. And of course, if I don't fix this, when you think about copy and pasting, you don't want to blindly copy and paste. I knew I was doing the same thing twice, but I need to change the variable names to be width 2 and length 2 and change my cout statement so that I'm asking the right question. And then area 2. Sometimes it's easier for you just to retype this than it is to click. And what you'll often find is the more you program, the more you sort of get used to using a lot of keyboard shortcuts as opposed to doing a bunch of mousing. All right. And finally here, rectangle 2 has an area of area 2. And again, if anybody has any questions about anything as we go, feel free to jump in. All right, so let's try this out. And I'll say the first one is 4 by 5. And let's say the second one is 7 by 9. Okay. Looks a little funky with my spaces like that, but I can live with that. Good. So now at this point, I can go in and grab this file and save it because I've completed m3t1. So I'll just download that and save it. And as I had mentioned for folks, if you don't want to program on your machine, let me actually go ahead and get this in here. I'm going to go to Bing again just for amusement's sake and go to code blocks. And remind people what you'd want to do if you want to install code blocks. Again, if you want to use Replit for everything, it's totally fine. But what you would do is you go to codeblocks.org, you go to downloads, and I want to point out here, I'm going to go to the binary release. You'll see it's a fairly old build. No, it's not actually. They've updated. That's great. Good. For a while there, it was not updated. What you're looking for is the one that says MinGW setup. MinGW stands for Minimum GNU Windows. That's because this was sort of originally a Linux program. So you'd find this link here. Click either FossHub or SourceForge. Those are both legitimate. And it's going to just save that file for you. And it's quite big, so I'm not going to download that now. And what I'll do later is put up a video on how to install that. All right, let's get back to our assignment. So we've done m3t1, which is just to calculate that information for both of these. Now we want to actually make a decision. So we're going to get into the if statement. And for anybody who's used a different language, then you're going to find that it's pretty similar. But if it's your first time, we want to be really careful with how this format works. All right. All right, we're going to use the if statement. And one thing that the book does that I kind of disagree with, they're not wrong, I just don't like it, is there's two ways you can do this. Let's try this and say, I'll say if okay, I'll show you the way they do it sometimes. They'll say something maybe like this and say cout. Okay. And that works, but I don't like that because if I then add another line, let me show you what happens. Okay, so I'm going to do this sort of the way I think is wrong to show you why. So I'm going to run this because you would sort of think, oh, this is tabbed in, so that's going to be two different things. All right. Okay, it's asking me if I want to pay, and I'm perfectly happy with what I have. So let's do the first one is 2 by 5, and the second one is 2 by 3. So the first one's bigger. Great, and that behaves sort of how you expect it to say. So now the question is, well, what if it's not bigger? Would you expect it to print thanks for using the program? And you might, but it won't. Or actually, I'll show you what I mean. It will print it when you might not think that it would. So I'm going to say they're both 2 by 2. Thanks for using the program. So what I'm trying to say here is when you're using an if block, I always suggest you do it like this. Okay, so first I want to show you what I did there. I write my if statement, and we'll talk about how to make the condition here in a bit. But I write my if statement, and I press open curly brace, and you'll see it auto-completes to put the second curly brace there. Then I press enter. And now it's made a nice little spot for my code to go. So anything that should happen inside the if statement should go in here. Some people did not do that on the versions they've already turned in. It's not necessarily wrong, but the point is if I wanted to make this code run only, if I wanted this to be if this is true, then I would put it inside the curly block, and if I don't, then I would not put it there. All right, I'm going to now do the other way, which I'll say if area 2 is greater than area 1. Okay. Okay. And I'll go ahead and make a little change here and add my third case. All right, at this point, this thanks for using the program is kind of useless, so I'm going to take that out. All right. So let's say area 1 is 10 and area 2 is 9. Okay, so it's going to say here, it's going to say, well, this is not true, or this is true. 10 is greater than 9, so 1 is bigger. Now I get down here, it says if 2 is greater than area 1, which means if 10 is greater, sorry, if 9 is greater than 10, that won't happen. And of course, 9 and 10 are not equal, so this one won't happen as well. I'm going to run this to confirm. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to is the equals equals. So as we learned, if I want to set a value, I set it with one equal sign. If I want to instead compare a value, I need to use two equal signs. So it's often set equals equals. So let's say this one's 4 by 4 and this one's 2 by 2. Okay, that's great. This is working. Now I'll do one of them will be 3 by 3 and the other's 4 by 4. And I see rectangle 2 is bigger. And printing out these numbers, yeah, of course, 16 is bigger than 9. And the last one I'm going to do, I'll do 2 by 2 and 2 by 2, and it says they are the same size. Whenever you do an if statement, it's vital that if you have three different options, that each of them, you test each of them. So it's what's called code coverage. I needed to run a test for each of these. Now, in this situation, something can't be bigger than something and also smaller than something. So this is working fine. But if there are situations where you only want one of these things to happen, and more than one of them could happen, then I would want to write it as else if. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And you're going to find this program works the same either way. Because since these conditions, because you're comparing two numbers, and a number is either bigger, smaller, or the same, there's no overlap, it's only ever going to do one of them. But one example would be something we'll look at later. What if you wanted to grade somebody? Okay, if your grade is greater than a 70, then you've got a C. But I don't want to give somebody with a 99 a C just because their grade is greater than 70.